Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's web forum, Farm to School and the Cost of Food Safety. Today we bring you the third in a series of Healthy Farms Help People Farm to School Month web forums with a special focus on food safety issues. My name is Holly Calhoun, and I'm the project coordinator of the Healthy Farms Healthy People Coalition, which works to build cross-sector collaboration for policy reform that promotes the health of all Americans while strengthening the economic and environmental viability of the food and agriculture sectors. We will be posting information from this web forum along with the other forums in our series on our website. I encourage you to check that out and share the link with interested colleagues. We will have time at the end of today's web forum for questions from you. And we'll ask that you please submit your questions through the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. However, there's no reason to wait till the end to submit your questions. Please do type them in as they come to you, and we'll be collecting those. So I do want to make sure that everybody knows how to use the Q&A box. So you'll see it there on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. The best way is to submit your questions to all panelists. And I'm going to ask you a question and ask you to type in an answer so that we make sure that everybody knows how to use the box. So the question for today is, what did you eat for breakfast? So in the bottom right-hand corner, coffee. That's a good one. I'm often choosing that for my breakfast as well. Oatmeal green smoothie, hot cereal with pep and oats. Wow, some good choices there. All right, well, I'm glad to see that you can all use that feature. I see some folks are also typing into the chat box. And that's also a good way to let us know if you have any questions at all. Another quick housekeeping note is that you should be hearing audio through your speakers or your computer headset. If you cannot hear, there is a teleconference number, and I will post that into the chat box along with an 800 number for WebEx, the software provider for this webinar, that you can call if you have any technical difficulties. So today you will hear presentations on the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Produce Rule, a brief overview from Lynn Kathleen of the Spark Policy Institute. A first look at produce safety on selected Oregon farms by Amy Gilroy of the Oregon Public Health Institute. Food safety challenges and opportunities for small-scale farmers from Bruce Frengruber from GlobalWise. A Producer's Perspective by Steve Fry from Fry Family Farm. Farm to School Challenges for Producers and Schools by Lynn Kathleen of the Spark Policy Institute. And School Producer Partnerships, Jeremy West of the Greeley-Evans School District. So here is a look at some of the faces behind the voices that you'll be hearing from today. And we've got a great webinar lined up, so without further ado, I'll pass it on to Lynn Kathleen from the Spark Policy Institute and the Colorado Farm to School Task Force.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. My name is Lynn Kathleen, and I am with Spark Policy Institute. We happen to be the staff to the Colorado Farm to School Task Force, which is a legislatively mandated 15-person body that has existed in Colorado since 2010 and has done amazing things in partnering with all of the great efforts happening here and really pushing farm to school forward in this state and also helping other states go forward too. So we're excited to be part of this series of webinars. To start today's webinar, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the Food Safety Modernization Act and the key components in the proposed produce rule. Last week's webinar on Friday, which was on the Food Safety Modernization Act, the Produce Rule, and Farm to School, covered these two major components that are in the current FSMA rulemaking. And so if you want to learn a lot of information, I encourage you to listen to that archived webinar for more detail. Also, this webinar will have links to additional resources about FSMA and the rulemaking. I want to thank the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture for providing the content that I'm going to share today about FSMA. Next slide. So what is FSMA? Well, the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law on January 4th, 2011. It is the first major overhaul to food safety laws since the 1930s. Now at the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, it's in its rulemaking stage. FDA is currently seeking comment on the proposed rules. FSMA will create a legislative mandate for applying comprehensive prevention-based controls across the food supply. Prior to FSMA, federal involvement with food safety around produce has been done through guidance documents, which are not mandatory. However, the federal food safety guidance, such as GAP, which stands for Good Agricultural Practices, has been implemented widely even without there being a federal mandate. FSMA will be creating federal mandates, however, around different things such as GAP and other food safety measures. During the crafting of FSMA, there will be critical wins. There were critical wins for sustainable agricultural community. There is some concern, however, that the proposed produce rule as it's currently drafted will undermine the intent in FSMA to create rules that are friendly to the sustainable agricultural community. And this is actually why you really should become aware of some of the content of this and become involved if this is an area of great concern to you. FSMA has 4 parts. I'm going to provide a very quick overview today only on Title I standards for the produce safety rule. Next slide. So what is covered in the produce safety rule? It sets up federal regulations for produce production on farms for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce for human consumption. These include standards around this whole list that you see here there, so personnel qualifications and training, health and hygiene, agricultural water, biological soil amendments of animal origin, domesticated and wild animals on your farms, growing, harvesting, packing, and holding activities, equipment, tools, buildings, and sanitation and sprouts. How you can compost, hand washing, equipment, and so on are all parts of the rulemaking right now that I look as though most people feel pretty good about those. However, there are some concerns around other areas of the rulemaking, and some of these include aspects of water testing. Some of the biological soil amendments that are being proposed seem to be in conflict with the national organic standards and so on. So there's a number of areas that are worth getting informed about and involved in. Next slide. FSMA includes some exemptions. Just to be clear, no one who is growing food for others is exempt from the responsibility of producing safe food, but some farms and businesses are exempt from the full FSMA regulations. With respect to the produce rule, you would be exempt if your produce is rarely consumed raw. So a good example are potatoes are exempt from the produce rule. Produce for personal or on-farm consumption. So if you're growing it for yourself, you don't have to be covered by FSMA. And then also very small farms. So farms that sell on average over a 3-year period, less than 25,000 are not covered by the produce rule. Next slide. FSMA also has modified requirements. Currently in the proposed produce rule, this would be for those farms that are doing that are receiving for produce that's coming off of farms that receive commercial processing, the produce rule does not apply, and that's because in the process of commercial processing of the food, other food safety regulations come into play, and so the produce rule does not apply to those things. Also, it does not apply to those that have an average annual monetary value in the previous 3-year period that's less than $500,000 and they sell 51% or more directly to consumer or retail food establishments in the same state or within what would be called a local radius of 275 miles. Then what would happen is that that producer would provide information on their label or a sign at the point of sale, and this is really about traceability. Neither exemption or modified requirement necessarily precludes a farmer from having GAP certification or other food safety measures in place. So FSMA and the produce rule are of particular interest to small farms and to farm to school, because many schools actually source from these small and mid-sized farms. So how and if FSMA applies matters to both the producers and the school food service directors. We're going to hear more about that from the next set of speakers. Next slide. Just a quick call out. If you want to comment on the proposed rules, FDA is accepting public input through November 15th, 2013, so for about another month. Also, you'll see when you get these slides in the follow-up email to participating today that you'll have links to all of these. Next slide, please. If you feel like you need more information in order to be involved in the comment period, you'd like to do it, but you're not quite sure about other things, like I said, I encourage you to go back and listen to our previous webinar. Also, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition has a tremendous amount of great resources, and I encourage you to go to their site to learn more. Next slide, please.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lynn, for providing that background on what we might anticipate once the produce safety rule becomes law and how we can provide public comment. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Again, my name is Amy Gilroy, and I'm a project manager at Oregon Public Health Institute, a nonprofit advocacy organization located in Portland, Oregon. Today, I'm excited to share with you a study that OPHI conducted in consultation with Global Wise Inc., an agricultural economics firm here in the Pacific Northwest. The purpose of our study was to examine the cost of on-farm food safety practices and attitudinal differences towards food safety programs among a selected group of Oregon farmers. Our findings have been helpful in that they have helped us better understand how the forthcoming food safety laws might affect different segments of producers here in Oregon. Next slide. A quick word about OPHI for those of you who don't know who we are. We advocate for effective public policy and systems change to prevent chronic disease risk and poor health outcomes. We often collaborate with non-governmental and governmental partners alike. For example, OPHI is currently partnering with the Oregon League of Cities to help local jurisdictions establish low and no-cost food, farm, and nutrition policies that have a positive impact on public health. And here are a few examples of some of the efforts that we have made here in Oregon to achieve that. Next slide, please. It likely goes without saying, but health advocates increasingly recognize the complex interactions of the food system and implications for public health. As we continue to study the food system, we are able to understand how agricultural production practices affect the quality of our soils, our air, our water, and contribute to a safe food supply. In turn, these same methods affect food and farm workers, local communities, and of course, consumers, as many of you are aware of. Next slide, please. So what does our food system look like here in Oregon? Many of you may know that agriculture is a leading employment industry in Oregon, accounting for about 20% of all jobs in the state. Part of Oregon's strong agricultural economy can be attributed somewhat to the state's land use program that has helped protect and preserve agricultural lands over the past 40 years since its adoption. While not perfect, the land use program has helped to protect about 16 million acres of land in Oregon that's designated exclusively for farm use. Oregon also has a strong local food and farm economy with a network of farmers markets across the state. Nearly half of these farmers markets currently accept both SNAP and WIC Farm Direct Nutrition Program coupons. And have a very high redemption rate of those food assistance programs. Oregon is also a national leader in the Farm to School program. The state of Oregon has dedicated staff positions in both the Oregon Department of Education and the Oregon Department of Agriculture, whose jobs are who work directly with schools and farmers, respectively. The Farm to School program had a significant victory this past legislative session, securing $1.2 million in general funds to help school districts purchase locally produced and processed foods from Oregon growers. Funds will also help districts develop agricultural-based education programs in public schools. Despite these achievements, though, Oregon continues to struggle with childhood hunger and family food security. Nearly 30% of the state's children are food insecure, and Oregon continues to be one of the top 5 hungriest states. Currently, about 1 in 5 Oregonians are enrolled in the SNAP program. Conversely, Oregon also suffers with the rest of the country in the national obesity epidemic, with over a 60% rate of adult overweight and obesity. Next slide, please. So now I just want to switch gears a bit and talk about the purpose of our project. We had 3 primary objectives of our study. Firstly, we wanted to better understand how producers in Oregon are responding to the demand for a safer food supply via food safety certification, such as the GAP program. Secondly, we wanted to test assumptions that we had about producers' attitudes about the necessity for food safety and what factors motivated them to become certified. And finally, we wanted to get a sense for whether producers were tracking the cost of food safety measures on their farms and what portion of their net income could be attributed to these measures, which Bruce will get into in more detail next. Next slide. Before I turn it over to Bruce, though, I wanted to very quickly introduce, for those of you who don't know about the USDA GAP program, I'm sure many of you do, but the GAP-GHP audit verification program began in 2002 as a voluntary certification program to provide assurance to wholesale fruit and vegetable buyers that produce suppliers were following food safety guidelines. So this is a voluntary certification program that growers willingly participate in. As Lynn mentioned earlier, GAP provides general standards for growing, harvesting, handling, and packing produce on farm. And these measure sections are similar to what will likely be covered in both the produce safety and preventive control rules once they're promulgated. GAP is currently administered by the State Departments of Agriculture at the request of growers and requires annual recertification and on-farm inspection. And so Bruce is going to go into a little bit more detail about the cost of GAP compliance and food safety from our study.
Great. Well, thank you, Amy, and it's good to join everyone on the webinar today. So I'm Bruce Prenguber. I'm an agricultural economist and owner of my firm called Global Wise, economic consulting firm in Vancouver, Washington. And I spend a lot of time looking at agriculture and economics, and so this has been a wonderful project to work on in that respect. Next slide, please. In early 2012, Amy and I proposed to Healthy Farms and Healthy People Coalition that we take a look at the cost implications of the proposed FDA rule, the produce rule, and especially looking at farmers that grow fresh vegetables and fruits and sell them in fresh product form. And we had to adjust that goal because, as you know, there was some delay, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we found one of the reasons we wanted to propose this is that Oregon is a very good location, a state with many smaller producers growing a large variety, over 200 different crops in the state due to the variation in climate and soils and elevations across the state. So there's a lot of reasons that Oregon is a good location to take a look at here. Fruits and vegetables are a big part of Oregon crop production, but mainly the crops are grown for processing, led by potatoes, onions, green beans, sweet corn, and berries, for example, which are an important Oregon fruit crop. They're also largely produced and then frozen. But we do have an important smaller segment of the industry in fruits and vegetables that are grown for fresh production, and we have a number of smaller produce farmers that are looking at distribution channels that are requiring food safety be looked at very carefully. And then the last point, unfortunately, Oregon has joined a lot of other locations around the country and had some produce recalls. So that gives Oregon producers more incentive to think about food safety as well. Next slide, please. So in the project approach, as I mentioned, we initially were going to look at the produce rule, and I guess naively thought that by the fall of 2012, the FDA would announce the proposed produce rule. As I think you probably all know, excuse me, that didn't happen. It wasn't until early January of 2013 that occurred. So we went to Plan B, which was to look at the current good agricultural practices that have been described by Amy and Lynn, and looked at the costs that growers have had in that respect. So we collected a number of possible farmers to interview from a number of sources. We tried, our intent was to look at the small and medium-sized farmers. We did get, not knowing the size of the growers when we started, we did get a few large growers in the mix as well. And we interviewed both those that are GAP certified and those that are not. It ended up that we had 16 Oregon farmers that participated and worked with us through that study. One of them, Steve Fry, will be talking next. Next slide, please. So here's a table. I've got a few tables in the next few slides, and this one is a profile of farms by their status, whether they're certified under good agricultural practices or not. So the first column there tells you that we have 4 farms in the group that are GAP certified, were GAP certified in 2012 when we did this. 3 of the farms said they intended in the next 2 years to become GAP certified, and 9 farms who said they did not expect in the foreseeable future to become certified. And the key takeaway from this slide really is if you look at the first row, the gray row where it talks about the 4 farmers that are GAP certified, what you quickly find is that these are the larger farmers that are currently getting the certification. Under the sales range, the smallest farm had sales of at least $250,000, and it went up over $1 million in sales. We actually had 4 farms in our group that had over $1 million of sales. The other important thing to note there is that their first primary market channel are the wholesale buyers who sell the produce on to primarily to grocery stores and food service buyers. And one of the key things that came very apparent quickly in this study was that the wholesalers were requiring GAP certification for food safety. So that was an important reason for those growers to be certified. You'll also see that the employment range there, which that employment includes seasonal, part-time workers as well as full-time, but we had a range of 23 workers on these farms up to 160 in the largest farm case. So very much large farms. And then if you go down to the second row, you see that that middle tier, those that look like they're coming on board, are also the next largest set of growers, essentially. The smallest grower did have $20,000 of annual sales, but it did range up again up to the $1 million level. So those farms are also pretty well established and also have market channels that require that they be that they have a food safety program. And those that are left, the 9 farms that do not intend to become GAP certified, are among the smallest and have a much more diverse range of market channels of where they sell to. Next slide, please. Holly, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So whoops, I think I went a little too far. Let me back up. There we go. So indicated costs. These are not all the costs that were incurred, but I wanted to give you a feel for where farmers incur these food safety costs. And primarily it's, to a large measure, it's the labor costs that they have. When growers have these food safety programs, there's first of all training of their workers to meet the requirements. They're also doing additional tasks such as field inspections, looking for evidence that maybe deer or other animals have intruded on the fields. They're paying staff to do record keeping that they didn't otherwise do. It may include some of the owner's time, and this is one of the issues that comes up pretty quickly because the smaller the farms, the fewer workers there are, and the more that the owner has just a wide variety of work they need to do. And so when they start moving into food safety, they are basically oftentimes they're trading off those precious hours that they've got to do other things for their food safety work. One of the farms, the second category there, water treatment, $14,400 in annual supplies. And this really points out the real necessity for food safety. They had a problem with some pathogens in some wash water. And so when they became certified, they had to move very quickly to treat their water system. But it was an expensive cost for them to do that. One of the farms in the group had some flooding, and they couldn't sell their vegetables in that area of the farm, so they lost about $2,500 in produce sales. The audit fees, which are every year, they're annually audited by the state departments of agriculture, and so in Oregon, they're going out annually, and that charge was between about $540 and $800. And then there's some soil testing that 3 of the 4 farms needed to do, much lower amount, but still an annual cost. Next slide, please. So what we did, we took a look at the costs in the first column there. The food safety costs per acre ranged from a low of about $41 to a high on one farm of almost $262 per acre. And we took a study. We didn't ask the growers to give us their net income per acre, and that's a difficult thing to calculate and get consistent answers to anyway. But we looked at a study done in Wisconsin that showed that net income on the low end for these smaller produce farms comes in at about $1,100 per acre. And at that level, you see the percentages of net income that these food safety costs per acre could relate to. So, it could be 3.7%, or on the high side for these lower net income farms, it could be almost 25% of their net income on the food safety cost. But switching over, if you're a high-income farm, if you had, according to that Wisconsin study, a almost $500 per acre income, you could be fairly negligible. Less than 0.5% of your net income could relate to food safety costs, and it could go up from there. Next slide, please. So farmer viewpoints. I think you're seeing probably from where this has gone so far that the larger farms are the more supportive farms of adopting GAP. There's a number of reasons that we found for that. First of all, they have a larger number of acres, so whatever the cost is that they have to bear, they spread that over more acres, and it reduces at least the cost per acre that they incur. They also have a larger number of employees. They can adapt to the record-keeping requirements and the other requirements that come along with food safety more easily. And they also have adapted, and this has been found in other studies as well, that farmers adapt GAP because their buyers require it of them. And they really, the larger the farm, the less choice you have, the more you're using market channels, as I discussed earlier, like the produce distributors, who are going to require that you have that in order to sell to them for their customer base. Before I talk about some of the objections, that occurred, I do want to say that there were some farms in our survey that very quickly came to the realization that they saw benefits to GAP certification. One farmer in particular said it really made them a better farmer. I mean, and I think all farmers have this view, but some farmers come to it quicker than others, that, you know, food safety is very important to them, to the long term, not only to their customers, which they're very important. It's important that they sell healthy food, but their livelihood and their reputation depends upon it. And secondly, there were farms that also said, you know, at first we didn't realize this, but having GAP certification makes us more efficient because we're doing things on a standardized basis. And when we do that, we come to do things quicker and better and faster. So some of them found that. But really the majority did find some issues with GAP. And again, this tended to be, the more we heard about the objections, generally the smaller the farmers were. Can we go to the next slide, please? So some of the issues, first of all, consultants are often needed ahead of the GAP audit, and the consultant costs can be very substantial. Several thousand dollars is not uncommon to get a consultant out to go through the farm and talk to the grower about essentially what the issues are that they may face and how they should address them. Of course, the GAP audit fees that we talked earlier about are an annually recurring cost. The auditors come out more than once per year when they look at the farms. There's also the time spent in the preparation, the documentation, and maintaining of that food safety plan, and that's a lot of time. And time is a very precious commodity for these growers. And then there's also the unknown of what's got to be corrected and managed. So that's a concern from an attitudinal standpoint for them. Next slide, please. Some of the other objections that we came across were they question, you know, the science basis for some of the GAP rules that there are. For example, you know, there'll be a statement that the compost pile needs to be X feet from a field, and some growers really question how that is identified and if it's really based on, you know, solid information or sort of an arbitrary estimate. And then there's some clashes. This was mentioned earlier by Lynn regarding the organic standards. Sometimes the concentration for chemicals that might be used to wash vegetables means that's going down in the groundwater, and that's in opposition to some of the organic standards. And we talked earlier about the fear of the unknown. So next slide, please. So just quickly to summarize here some of the main findings, some of these low net income farms are definitely looking at costs that are pretty deeply going to impact them on the income side of their operations if they have some high costs there. And many of these smaller growers in particular are skeptical of the benefits. Both, you know, they feel like there's some economic impact upon them, but beyond that, they're just not sure that it's justified for the consumer that some of these regulations make for better, safer food supply. The other thing that I want to end with is something that was mentioned in Friday's webinar, but I think it's very significant potentially here too, and that is looking now at the produce rule. So there's exemptions by farm size for some of these farms to come under the produce rule. But if their buyer, and this was what happened in GAP, say, you know, this is a standard to follow, in order for them to make that market channel work for them, they're going regardless of their exemption, they're going to have to meet the standard or not sell in that market channel. So that's got some implications for future growth potential for some of these farms as well. Next slide. So be sure and contact Amy if you'd like to see the full report. We've got that available, and it's on their website at that link. And next slide. So I'd like to thank you for your attention and turn it over to Steve Fry. Thank you.
My name is Steve Fry. Let me get this going here. There we go. My name is Steve Fry, and my wife and I are owners of Fry Family Farm. We've been farming in the Rogue Valley here for 24 years. And we started the farm on like a little half-acre block 24, 25 years ago. And half-acre block with 5 girls. We wanted to get into farming because we wanted to be with our kids, and that's what we did. So we just kept growing, and now we're up to 90 acres, and we're certified organic, and we sell to local growers markets. We do like 5 growers markets. I've got the stores, local stores here. We run about 150 people in our CSA, and I sell wholesale to an organically grown company. We also grow about 10 acres of flowers for fresh cut bouquets and for the markets. We sell them to the stores, and we also sell the new seasons up in Portland. We also have a little company called Lamera Gardens, which is our wholesale flower deal, and she's got a little refrigerated truck. She runs around here locally to the florists, and she sells to different weddings in town here. So, we got into, oh, yeah, that's right, we also have a nursery. We're a very diverse farm. We got a lot of stuff going on up here. We got a little nursery. It's got like 6 greenhouses. We sell our little nursery starts to stores around town here. Oh, I'm supposed to be flicking the slides. Thank you. Come on, man. There you go. We sell nursery starts. We got 6 of these greenhouses for little nursery starts. Very awesome. We do transplants for the farm. We transplant about 75% of our farms every year, so we have a lot of babies, and then we just, diversified out to selling them to stores. Works really well in the spring. So we got like 12 greenhouses on the farm. We have 6 in the nursery here. So certificates we have a farm here. We have 3 separate farms. They're all certified organic. They're certified salmon safe, and they're good agricultural practice. And we also have good handling practice. For us to certify GAP and good handling was a lot. We had to hire a food safety person. We actually did it in-house. We just gave another one of our employees more hours, which is, she gets, anywhere between 200, 300 hours a year doing our food safety deal. We test our water. We have to have our well and our irrigation water tested 3 times a year. A little cost there. And we had to write the food safety plan, which is very intense, 12-page manual, has lots of logs. We have to have logs on our water. Our coolers have to be temperature watched over, and many other things, restrooms. It's logs, a lot of logs. Everything's logged. And so, like the total cost for us, it took me about $10,000 to get the farm up to specs. and it costs about $4,000 a year to maintain our food safety program. Some of the positives that we got out of this food safety deal was, the employees become more aware of safe food handling practices. Like the temperature of the coolers are maintained now, cold chain is better established, and cleaner areas. Let's flip this. Picture of the farm. It's somewhat challenging. Some of the challenges are keeping all the logs filled out. Here's a slide of our guys. This is our food processing area at this time. Small. This is going to have to be changed again next year. We're planning on building a larger facility. So right now you can see half of it's concrete and the other half is gravel, kind of looked down upon. It is covered. We had to get GAP certified right away because our wholesaler had some issues and made anybody selling to them GAP certified. Everybody has to get GAP certified now if you're going to this wholesaler, organically grown. So some of the challenges are, of course, the ongoing record keeping, keeping these guys from having the food in the food prep area. You can't have that. No drinks, no smoking, no food and drink in the trucks, signing in the visitors, all the little stuff that we used to not really pay any attention to. Changing their frame of mind is difficult. It's time consuming. The Food Safety Modernization Act, I've got a lot of concerns about that coming up. The irrigation water is one of them. We test our water right now, and the E. coli and fecal chloroform levels are way through the roof. Being an organic farmer, I really protest the idea of chlorinating my irrigation water. That's going to be a big deal. Right now, we mitigate the risk with the GAP certification with our drip irrigation. Most of my farms, everything that's planted like transplant, we transplant into plastic, and it's all on drip. You can see here, this whole farm is all drip. So we plastic, we put the drip line down, and the food never touches the water. And that's pretty much the deal. And on our irrigation, on our seed stuff, post-harvest intervals, and of course everything goes through a chlorinated dip tank, which what Bruce was talking about kind of conflicts with the organic status. Food safety, you want to, our dip tanks are right behind this guy here. We have two of them. One is at 200 parts per million chlorine. I think we just jacked that up to 4. We had an organic tilth inspector in here a couple of months ago, and he said we could go 4 on it, parts per million. And then we have a clean freshwater dip tank that we rinse the chlorine from the 400 parts. So it goes GAP and then it goes organic. So I can keep my organic status with all this stuff. It's a little confusing, but not a problem. But when it comes to irrigation water, that's going to be a whole other problem if this Food Modernization Act goes into place. Compost rules is another problem with this Food Modernization deal. Not real sure where that's going to lead. The leafy greens agreement that they have in California, we had a consultant up here from that group, and she flunked me as soon as she walked on the farm. Compost has to be 400 feet from any leafy green, and I have a small farm. Everything's really intense and close, and she didn't like that. But GAP is different. and we qualify with the way the farm is now, but I'm not sure what's going to happen. Most large farms do their processing away from the farm, and none of them, very few large farms, compost on site. I'm kind of an old school organic guy. Compost is a big part of what I do and what I believe in, and I don't know that the federal government's going to go for that too much. I'm not really a certificate guy, but when your wholesaler, who does a large part of your business, says you have to certify GAP or you can't sell here, that's what you do. I was probably one of the last ones to certify organic. I figured I was an organic farmer for a long time. My parents before me were organic, old school farmers, and we fed a lot of people, never got anybody sick. I figured it was pretty cool, but then the stores say, hey, you can't sell here unless you have a certificate. Can't call it organic unless it's got a certificate, so back in the 80s I certified. As far as the future of all this GAP and stuff going, Food Safety Modernization Act, my stores, my wholesalers, everybody I talk to think it's all coming. It's really going to put small farms in a bind. $25,000 in 3 years is not very much money for a small farm. That's more of a hobby farm style. I'm not sure what the small farmers are going to be doing to get this GAP thing. Like I say, we had to put out a lot of time and money to get this thing rolling. We're going to put out a whole lot more money next year to build this new facility. You just got to do more business, I guess. As far as the farm to school deal goes, I've been involved with them at least 5 years here. And first meeting we went to, they wanted to make sure everybody was insured. This was before the GAP thing got involved. I had a $2 million policy at the time, liability policy, not a lot of business. And here lately, now they're talking about you have to have GAP and good handling practice because we wash and process all our veg. Still not a lot of sales, and what I see with that is the schools have lost the ability to handle the fresh produce, and you know that entails a lot of things: the labor costs, you know, what to do with a carrot. I mean, do I roast it? Do I bake it? What, you know, boil it? They've lost the menus. That they don't have any handle on how to prep the food. It's a little embarrassing. So as far as this whole thing goes, there we go. We do farmers markets. There's my girls having a good time. You really can't beat what we do. It's a good, wholesome thing. I tell my guys they're like Jesus. They feed the multitudes, man. They put out a lot of food, and we love our job, and we love what we do. And that's pretty much what I got. We'll pass it on to our Lynn.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve, and Amy and Bruce. Those were very informative. I just want to really do a quick little overview introduction into Jeremy West's presentation because there are significant and complicated challenges for doing farm to school, and you heard Steve mention a couple of them already. Next slide, please. From a food service director perspective, sometimes it's as simple as I don't even know where the farmers are. And so trying to find the farmers who will sell to schools, even in the rural areas. We hear food service directors who are surrounded by farms, not knowing which of those farmers are interested in selling to them. Understanding what's called the geographic preference option, which is a new rule that came into play in 2010 with the reauthorization of the Child Nutrition Act, is something that can help food service directors, but it's often not well understood. Food service directors typically have, just bought from one distributor, and that's kind of a point and click, and you get all of your things, do it online. When you're buying from farmers, it's multiple individual contracts. This is a lot of work. It's a lot of coordination. Having what we call a plan B. This is something Jeremy often talks about, which is that, you know, unexpected things happen to small producers, and you have to be able to, if you're a food service director, still have those carrots, still have that lettuce. If a big flood hits like we had happen here in Colorado last month and you lose a lot of that production that you were going to buy, you have to be able to have a plan B if you're a food service director. And then, of course, food service directors have very stringent budgets that they work on. It turns out that that can seem like a real big limitation, both from the food service director perspective and from the producers who think that they just can't afford to buy locally. This is actually, in many instances, there's kind of wonderful different ways to work around that, and those food service directors who've been sourcing locally have great ideas on how to use a limited budget and still buy local. And then, of course, you have to have an on-food safety plan, and we already heard Steve talk about that. Next slide. From the small and mid-sized producer side, really learning about a farm to school as a potential market. There's a learning curve there. A lot of small producers really don't even know where to start. And so we often say, well, you start by building a relationship with your local food service director. And honestly, this actually helps in so many different ways because it helps the food service director feel comfortable about sourcing locally, and it helps the producer be able to explain to the food service director why they need certain things in place and how they have to do their on-farm food safety plan maybe a little bit differently, not as extensive. And so that relationship building is critical to a good one, a good farm-to-school plan. And then, of course, a lot of producers say, well, I'm too small to be able to feed a big school district or even a medium-sized school district. But it turns out a lot of food service directors are really looking to just to source something locally. And so they're not looking for that producer to provide all of the apples or all of the lettuce. Responding to the bid from an institution is a new area for many of the small producers. Liability insurance is something that schools will want, and we heard Steve talk about that. And again, on-farm food safety is absolutely a necessary ingredient to selling to schools. Now I'll hand it over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Lynn. So I'm Jeremy West, and I'm going to move quickly through my presentation so we have a little time for questions. So put your seatbelts on. You can go to that next slide. I'm the Nutrition Service Director in Greeley-Evans, Weld County School District 6, kind of north of Denver, about 45 miles. We're in our 6th year with a farm-to-school program. I'm in my 5th year as the Nutrition Service Director. So you can see a little bit about our district, and we're a very diverse district, serve a lot of meals per day, and I'm also serving as the current chairman of the Colorado Farm to School Task Force. Next slide. So our journey kind of began in 2009. Just before I got here, we purchased just one local crop, and from that we have grown that program to now purchasing over the years over 30 crops from 5 local farms. We have a local purchasing co-op that we've band together, which is helping us as districts be able to build those good relationships with local growers of all sizes. We've purchased from farms as small as 2 acres and on up to 2,200 acres. Then in January of 2011, we began a return to scratch cooking and began improving our meal system here in Greeley. And so Farm to School has played an important part in that journey, and also working on a food hub as well. Next slide. Just want to remind you that there's many entrances into Farm to School. It can look many different ways, lots of players. There's really no wrong way to start Farm to School. So maybe you're on the call today and you're a grower or producer. You can certainly be one of those players that you see on the top of the line there. Sometimes we nutrition service directors have that heart for a local purchasing program. Maybe it's students or teachers. And then you can see below the line there are just a lot of different ways that Farm to School starts. Sometimes it's just one day. We have a Colorado Proud Day in Colorado where we feature, a lot of schools have started their Farm to School program by just featuring on all local menu on that one day of their school menu. And you can see the other ways that we've heard from schools and school districts that have started Farm to School programs. Next slide. So Farm to School, why now? First of all, you know, we are just like any other restaurant or food service operation, customers kind of drive us, and so it's trendy right now. Being local, buying local is trendy across the nation, and there is consumer demand for buying local when possible. As a nutrition service director, we always have that desire to provide nutrition education. It's hard to get that into the classroom. We're in an era of bell-to-bell instruction, and so going in and teaching where your food comes from can be challenging for many districts to get into the classroom, and so this opens the door to do that within the cafeteria. Also, USDA guidance helped open the door back in 2011 when they gave better direction to nutrition service directors across the country and promulgated a final rule that gives us permission, basically, and a preference to buy geographically, gives us that geographic preference to promote local purchasing. And then really the new USDA meal pattern, as that rolled out, and there's been an increased requirement for fruits and vegetables to be offered, for vegetable subgroups, meaning that we have to offer so many red-orange vegetables per week, so many leafy greens, et cetera, and then sodium restrictions. This is really helping drive many school districts to just buy fresh food, and so Farm to School plays an important role in that. Just one little example from School District 6 on this next slide. This is my burrito story. So this is Farm to School. Here's an example of how Farm to School ingredients helped my district in reducing sodium. So we used to buy a pre-made burrito that we offered, and that had 35 plus ingredients, many of the ingredients I could not pronounce their names, and offered 532 milligrams of sodium. Now we actually purchase beans from a local farm, dry pinto beans, cook those, combine them with cheese, hand roll those, about 9,000 every 4 weeks. We're making burritos from scratch, and we've been able to reduce that by 126 milligrams per serving, and it only has 12 ingredients, and half of those are spices. So every day that we serve this burrito versus our old one, we've actually removed 11.8 cups of salt from our students' diets. Next slide. Talking about the Colorado Farm to School Task Force, some of these you have seen if you were on the call last week, the webinar. You know, there are certainly some top barriers that were identified through a survey. Food safety, the perception of cost of local food is higher, availability of produce year-round, especially in Colorado, we're pretty diverse and don't have a long growing seasoning. Additional barriers, increased administrative burden. We don't have that one-stop shop when you have Farm to School. It does take some more administration. We have to figure out that supply chain. Increased liability. As a food service director buying from a traditional vendor, they assume the liability of that produce being safe. If I remove them and I'm buying directly from the farm, now I have to make sure that I have a safe vendor that I'm buying from. Some schools don't have the right facilities or equipment. Like Steve referenced earlier, some schools don't even have a produce sink to wash fresh produce, so that's a challenge. And then of course, staff skill levels. If they're used to buying pre-washed and pre-chopped, now they have to figure out how to turn these heads of lettuce into salad for 500 students, and that there is a knack to that, to get that done on time. Next slide. So why is food safety the top concern? I think we've talked about this a little bit, but obviously we're serving children and we're serving them on a large scale in many cases. And one wrong move with your food safety, buying from an unapproved vendor, you know, farms that maybe don't have a food safety plan in place or any other factor can really result in the end of our program and a lot of students being sick. So as food service directors, that's part of our job description, to ensure that our food supply is safe, that we have, you know, done our due diligence to ensure that. Next slide. This one you also saw last week, so I'll just quickly go through that. You know, buying from distributors are easy. They take care of the food safety recording. They vet those vendors. Buying directly from producers, as from a director standpoint, is a little bit harder. We have to work with them. We have to make sure that they have those food safety practices and that GAP and GIP certification in some cases in place. And so, but regardless of farm size, you know, every farm that I buy from has to have some type of on-farm food safety plan. Next slide. FSMA and barriers to Farm to School. So FSMA, you know, has exemptions for small farms. That's helpful for small farmers. One of the things that we fear, directors will say, well, then I'm just going to buy from larger farms because they fall under FSMA. But from my perspective, I think that gives a false sense of security. Just because the farm is larger doesn't mean that they necessarily have their act together when it comes to food safety. So I think we always have to go through that process and just make sure that farms that we're buying from, big or small, have a food safety program in place. And there's worry that it'll create an uneven playing field when larger farms are more competitive in those institutional markets. But again, schools will always require some type of safety plan. And so really all farms, whether you fall under FSMA or not, that's the bandwagon you'll need to be on if you want to sell to schools and institutions. Next slide. So what's a food service director to do? On the next slide, I'll just see some top 10 tips there about if you're starting farm to school implementation. Next slide there. What's local? Know what's local for your region. I would suggest to start small. Start with one crop on one day. Maybe it's at one school, but start small. Don't try and do everything farm to school at once. Visit the farm, large or small, see what's going on, and you can see the other things there, from staff training to marketing the program to looking for those opportunity buys. Maybe there's a market for seconds. Maybe your growers, they have some produce that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, except it doesn't look as pretty as they need it to for a farmer's market. And so schools need it. We often are chopping that up and putting it in things, so it doesn't have to look as pretty. And then also those full year crops, especially if you're in a market that has a short growing season. Pinto beans, they're good year round. And so look for those full year crops to extend your season. Just going off script a little bit, promoting benefits to the growers. If you have never sold to schools or think, why do I need to invest my time in that? 5 things that I thought of. Schools are a stable, reliable institutional market. They can add diversity to your business model, and just like any business, having a diverse business plan is a good thing. It adds stability to your revenue stream. That farm to school can really help you connect to your community. People love it. It's great PR for the farm, great PR for the school district, and will help connect you with kids in the community. And it's an opportunity to partner on specialty crops. So you may have a school district that says, hey, I want to grow this crop and offer it on this day, and they're willing to commit to that. So I think there are, benefits on both sides. Going on to the next slide, just remember there's lots of important partnerships. It really takes a village of people to make farm to school happen. And so whether you're a farmer, a teacher, a parent, a community member, a food service director, it takes all of those working together along with our local health agencies and food banks and cooperative extensions to just make a farm to school program work. And so it takes some time to develop those important relationships. Then the next couple of slides, just some examples. If you are, again, on the webinar last week, you saw this. Ultimately, food service directors need a way to navigate through food safety issues. So this was an example of kind of a flow chart of, questions to ask yourself when you're looking for navigating FSMA. On the next slide is a checklist that's available from the Colorado Farm to School Task Force, just a tool that we use. It's a 2-page tool that is kind of a modified version of GAP standards that can start as a springboard for connecting with one of your local growers. So I know we're out of time, so I wanted to get through mine quickly, and I'll pass it back on to Holly.
Great, thank you so much, Jeremy. We are running over time. As you said, I haven't seen, the only questions that have come through on the Q&A have already been addressed later on in the presentations. But I do want to encourage folks, we've got the speaker information up here on the screen, so please do feel free to email any of the speakers. If you do have questions, you can also email questions to me and we can get those answered for you in the future. And we've also got some resources here that were mentioned throughout the webinar. So please, you're welcome to utilize these links. And again, we will be recording and archiving this webinar on our website. So you'll be able to access all of these resources. I do want to give a big thank you to our speakers today and to the Spark Policy Institute, the Oregon Public Health Institute, Global Wise, Fry Family Farm, the Colorado Farm to School Task Force, and the Greeley-Evans School District. Thanks so much for all the information that these fantastic speakers were able to give us today, and thanks to all the participants who have taken time out of your days to be with us and learn here today. So with that, I will let everybody get along with their day, but we do also encourage you to please join us for our next webinar, the final webinar in our series, which will look at farm to school and urban farming issues. So we'll have a great opportunity to learn about a very innovative program in Denver where they're actually contracting farmers to grow food on the district's land and look at how food safety issues play into that. So thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy your day.